many of you are new tonight? Right. We got the Judd boys. Now, y'all have heard of the Judd girls. It's the singers. These are the Judd boys. We're glad to have them here tonight, along with Alan and Amy. Alan's going to be teaching our auditorium class tonight. Just keep it coming. Keep it coming. Jonah, how's it going, buddy? This time tomorrow night, he'll be a big brother. 850 will be our first song. Brother Jeff's going to lead us in that. It'll be our theme song. We'll ask Brother R.W. Vincent then to lead us in a prayer. And then we'll sing some songs with the children. And then we'll be dismissed to class. And we've got a lot of things coming up tonight. Boys and girls, the puppets are going to be here. You all ready for them? God, nobody's listening. They're all finding 850. That's good. That's right. Okay. Brother Jeff, come and lead us.
Father, I adore you, and I lay my life before you. Oh, how I love you. Jesus, I adore you, and I lay my life before you. Oh,
Okay. All right. Let's see. Where are we going to start? I'll tell you what. You need to get these kids out. They got a lot to learn. Now, who's teaching? Seth? Right? Okay. You got Seth happy tonight. You said Seth. Right. Seth, get up and lead them back through there. Okay? You guys go through that door. Watch the crowd go. Got to turn it on. Now I've got my mic on. They told me to turn my mic on. When I'm singing, I'll blow everybody out if I do that. All right, now let's see. Let's start with the nursery class. Just one tonight? Oh, that's... Okay, she's going to go to this class. Okay, 2s and 3s then. 2s and 3s. I love to go to class. I love to go to class. Sing it with all the other boys and girls. I love to go to class. I love to go to class. I love to go to class with all the other boys and girls. I love to go to class. All right, now, let me get them halfway back. Maisie, don't hurry. You're doing good, Maisie. Uh-oh, she's speeding up. Okay, 4s and 5s. Talk with Miss Tammy. Hey, guys. I know you're Adrian. My name's Edward. Some of the kids call me Mr. Brother Edward. Mr. Brother Edward. First and second grade, right here. The triplet sisters teaching that class. I asked them if they were sisters when they came in. Now, 3rd and 4th grade, right here. You girls have a big class. And 5th and 6th grade is right here. Glad to have you with us tonight, man. We are very happy to have with us tonight Brother Alan Judd. Most of you know Alan. He has been with us before in our VBS. We're happy to report that he is feeling better, and we're glad. He helps us out at camp. He preaches up in Overton County and at Allen's. Alan from Allen's is with us tonight, and he and Amy live in Jackson County. And I've known Alan ever since he was a little boy, and knew his dad and mom and other family members, and he always wanted to preach. Even when he was little, he practiced preaching, and I'd say he probably practiced baptizing and all of that. And he met Amy. Amy had always wanted to marry a preacher. And so they married. They met at, did y'all meet at camp?
Well, we knew each other before, but I was brave enough to get to know her better.
That's where it blossomed.
That's right.
Oh, okay. But anyway, they have three wonderful boys, and the oldest one's already preaching, and maybe the other one, second one, is it? Yeah, so both of them are, like father, like son. And we're just happy to have them with us tonight. And we know that he will do a good job with Esther and talking about courage, I believe. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. The floor is yours.
I wasn't very good at keeping records then. I'm certainly probably not much better now, but it was probably the fall of 1995. It could have been 1996, but either way the math works out. That was more than 20 years ago that I was first able to come and speak, I suppose, on a fifth Sunday here at Carthage. So I remember that, and this, along with a few other places, I knew that I was hitting the big time when I could come to a place like this and speak, and I appreciated those opportunities then, and I certainly do tonight as well. Amy and I love all of you, being involved with you with camp and a variety of other venues through the years. That means so much. The ring on my right hand here from Freed Hardeman, you were very instrumental in helping me to acquire that. And I didn't just buy the ring, I actually did the coursework too. But you were very kind in your support in helping me in that endeavor. And I'll be forever in your debt, eternally in your debt for that generosity that you showed in a financial way during our time there in Henderson. I appreciate the kind remarks. Had a little bout with tachycardia. You know what that is, just an accelerated heart rate that the doc was concerned about. I was more concerned than he was, actually. I'm used to my heart rate getting around 200 beats per minute when I'm enjoying running up and down the road, but sitting on the couch and being woken up with that was a different experience. And I didn't like watching my shirt bounce off of my chest like that, but he checked my plumbing and checked everything else, and he said, "You're too antsy, you work too much," and I was like, "Well, I know that, but tell me something to do about it." And he said, "Well, try to stay still and try not to work too much." So we'll see if that works or not. Maybe it will in some regards. If you're a movie buff, you might remember that I could give you some clues to say we're not in Kansas anymore. Now, I'm not wearing red ruby slippers, but you might remember the character. And if you want to answer, you can, but his well-known little discourse in that movie, when it kind of reaches its high point, he said, "What makes a king out of a slave? Courage. What makes the flag on the mast to wave? Courage. What makes the elephant charge his tusk in the misty mist or the dusky dusk? What makes the muskrat keep his musk? Courage. What makes the Sphinx the seventh wonder? Courage. What makes the dawn come up like thunder? Courage. What makes the Hottentot so hot? What puts the ape in the apricot? What do they got that I ain't got? Courage." You might remember what the Cowardly Lion says in response to that. You can say that again. That's sometimes how we feel. I know what I need, but I don't have it. And sometimes courage is one of those qualities that I know I need it. And I know the benefits of it, and I know the blessings that it would give to my life, but sometimes it's just hard to find it. It's in short supply. Teddy Roosevelt said this: "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best, in the end, the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat." I think President Roosevelt was just saying life takes courage. And even though in life, when we exhibit courage, we sometimes don't end up where we'd want to be, it's far better to be courageous and to do our best and to try and still fail than never to put forth the courage and the effort necessary to try in the first place. I'm convinced the longer that I live that courage is one of those indispensable traits of Christian living. It's one that when we talk of it, we might just think, well, of course, there are Bible characters who exhibited great courage. We could think about Daniel in the lion's den. That took courage to go to meet that fate. We think about his peers, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the 3rd chapter of that same book, telling the king, "We're not going to bow down to your image. You do with us what you will. God will deliver us, even if he doesn't. We're not going to back down. We're going to be courageous." Today, you might think of how courage is defined, and I can think of Christian people that I've known through the years, become acquainted with, and actually was very thankful to be able to be instrumental along with Amy in converting this family. But Brother Van Kaiser, none of you know him, but he straps himself into an F-14 Tomcat before they actually retired those jets for military service, would launch off of aircraft carriers and flew dozens of sorties over Iraq and Afghanistan in Operation Enduring Freedom and in our nation's fight against terrorism. It takes a lot of courage to strap in and do something like that. Another gentleman I met during our time in Mississippi, Brother Jason Smith, it took courage, or at least it would for me, to do what he did, because I always wanted to do what he got to do. He got to stand in the batter's blocks as a member of the Colorado Rockies organization. And he got to see a fastball come at him at 100 miles per hour. And on occasion, not near enough for his liking, he was able to make contact with that ball. But that took courage, just to stand there and see that. I think of another individual. Some of you know him. You may have much more of a relationship with him than I do. Amy and Edward count him as a family member by marriage. I do as well. Dr. Stacy Brewington, who in the Cookeville operating room will take and will manipulate the machinery in a very precise way to place a stent within those necessary arteries within your heart. And there's a blockage so that might be opened and blood flow will return. Does it take courage to work in that OR room? I'm certain that it does. But I can think of other individuals who, while not doing those great deeds, nevertheless had courage. And one that we still all revere and love and hold in our beloved memories, Brother Don Chaffin in his fight against ALS. Watching him and talking with him and seeing the courage and the resolve to face that illness and to fight it with everything that he had. And to merely lose the earthly battle, but to gain the heavenly victory, well, that took courage. And we could go on and on and on with individuals that we know in our own lives that exhibit courage. But tonight, take your Bible, if you're not there already, to the book of Esther. And I want to look at what I think is a fascinating story. The book of Esther has, through the centuries, been a subject of much controversy for one reason primarily, and it is because the name of God appears nowhere within its pages. God is not mentioned at all, at least specifically by name. But to conclude that a book that does not mention the name of God does not have His approval nor His influence within would be a very foolish statement to make indeed, because anyone who has read the book with any degree of discretion realizes very quickly that even though God's name is not mentioned, His influence is stamped on every chapter, on every page, perhaps within every sentence, because we see His working so mightily in the book. And it gives us great courage and encouragement, blessing, to read it and to consider it tonight. My specific assignment is just chapters 3 and 4. But if I can, very briefly, I'll try to give an overview of the chapter or of the book as a whole, and then we'll go back and look at those two chapters and look specifically at Queen Esther and the courage that she demonstrated in those two chapters individually. By this time, the book opens with the Persian ruler Ahasuerus. You may say Ahasuerus. It doesn't matter to me how you pronounce it. I'm just glad my name's Alan with 4 letters instead of all of those letters like his. But he reigned over an empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia. It's almost the same size and equivalence as our United States. If you can imagine that, this is around somewhere around 480 BC, about 480 years before Christ, round figures. And if you can imagine the primitive ways of communication that they had then compared to what we know today, to rule over an empire this vast was quite an accomplishment. It consisted of 127 provinces, which would be something similar, of course, to what we would say a state or a congressional district, if you will. But he's there, and he has enjoyed, as the leader of the Persians and the Medes, kind of the consolidation of what we pick up on following the book of Daniel with the fall of the Babylonian Empire, Darius succeeding him, and now Ahasuerus coming on the scene later. He gave a feast, a party. And this is one of those parties, kind of like they're having in Nashville for the hockey team, but this one's lasting even longer, 180 days, a 6-month party. I don't know. I think I'd get tired of, just having that much fun for that period of time. I need something else to do, maybe some work. That may get back to some of my problems. I need to relax more. But here, the feast for 180 days, and the king made a very simple rule in chapter 1. You have as good a time as you can possibly have. There's as much, if you want to use the old expression, wine, women, and song as you can enjoy. Enjoy it without limit. And so they did. And the king's officials, they were having a grand old time, and by the time we reached verse 10, the feast had kind of reached its high point, and the king said, well, we need to invite the queen in. We need to let her show her beauty, all of these princes, and to all of my great officials. Now, there is some, I guess, uncertainty. I don't know exactly what the king is asking. Some said that this was a very immoral request in the sense that he may have been asking her to present herself in a way that would have been demeaning, degrading, and even if perhaps with the absence of proper clothing in a very immodest way, that's possible. It could have been that he just wanted to make a spectacle out of her. And if you've ever observed men in a drunken state, you know their foolishness, and the way in which they behave is not proper in any regard. And so what exactly consisted with this request that he made, we're not knowing, or cannot know, at least in my study, with certainty, but it doesn't matter. She said, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to go along with that. And so the king's not happy, and his buddies kind of look at him, his advisors, and he says, well, if this is going to happen, if this woman's going to rise up and oppose you, well, women all over the kingdom, they'll start doing the same thing, so you better kick her out. Better find you another one. And that's exactly what happens as chapter 1 ends and chapter 2 begins. Women are sought to come into the king's harem to be his next queen. Esther is chosen. Verse 7 of chapter 2. Her name, Hadassah in Hebrew, means myrtle, the plant that would have been very beautiful, probably indicative again of her beauty. And the Bible does tell us there very clearly that she was beautiful of form and face. She's in a predicament that no child would envy. Her father and her mother had died, whether they had died in captivity or if they had suffered maybe in warfare. Again, we're not getting those details, but we are introduced to Mordecai. And Mordecai is here one who we sometimes say her uncle. It's probably better to say that maybe it was a cousin, because most of our versions tell us that Esther was his uncle's daughter. And if that is his uncle's daughter, that would make them at least a cousin, maybe more so than an uncle-niece type of relationship. But he had been responsible for her upkeeping, and she was selected to be among these contestants. I don't watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, but I don't know if this is the ancient version of that or not. From what I understand, nobody needs to watch those shows. If you do, I guess you'll have to provide justification for that tonight. But nevertheless, she was given her turn to go in before the king, and the king is pleased with her and appoints Esther to be queen in the place of Queen Vashti. So that's kind of how we leave chapter 2, but we do need to look at one important detail in verses 21 to 23. Mordecai becomes aware of a plot against King Ahasuerus, and that is told to Esther, and Mordecai is then is the one given credit. As Esther informs the king of this plot, it is investigated, and those two individuals who were his doorkeepers are hung for their act of treachery or treason that they were about to carry out on the king. That will be very important a little bit later. Chapter 3, we're introduced to the archenemy in the story, and his name is Haman. And there is, again, not a great deal of certainty that we have about this man and his background. He is described as the son of Hammedatha. He is called an Agagite. Now, if you remember anything about King Agag, and he was the leader of the Amalekites that Saul should have destroyed back in the book of 1 Samuel, there are those that suppose that this man might have had some tie to that lineage. And if so, you can understand his hatred toward the Jewish people, which will be manifest in just a moment very clearly. But Haman was the prime minister. He was the king's right-hand man. And the king said, you make anybody do whatever you want them to do. And when Haman passed by, the people were expected to bow before him as they would the king. Verse 2, the Bible says Mordecai would not. Now, Mordecai might have taken that course of action for several different reasons. Of course, very plainly stated in the Ten Commandments. God said, have no other gods before me. Do not bow down to any graven image. It may have been that. And Haman here claiming a place almost of deity. There is some of the rabbinical writings that suggested that he wore a signet or just some sort of big ornament of one of the pagan gods. I think the Babylonian moon god is what one rabbinical writing suggests. And he wore that kind of big ornament there to say that this is my God. And when he passed by, Haman said, you bow to me, and this is the God that I serve. And Mordecai said, I serve the true God. I'm not going to bow down to you, and I'm not going to bow down to your God. Again, that's a possibility. The Bible doesn't provide us with all of those details for sure. But he had had enough of that, or at least Haman had had enough of Mordecai's insubordination, and he finally said, I know what we need to do. We'll just take care of these people. So, King, there's some folks in the kingdom that aren't living up to their end of the bargain. You're providing them protection and care. Their laws are different. They're really a threat. So we need to annihilate them. And I'll provide the means necessary to do that, the men, the money. And you just give me that signet ring. You stamp it and make the decree so that it's certain, and I'll take care of the rest. Ahasuerus said, hey, you're the prime minister. That sounds like a good plan to me. You know what we need to do to keep the kingdom running effectively, so do it. And thus there is a decree sent out from Shushan, from the capital city there, throughout all these 127 provinces, that on a certain day all the Jews would be killed, men and women, boys and girls. And today the only thing, I guess, comparable that we can imagine is to try to think, and I have to look through the lens of history. Some of you might vaguely remember some of this, but during World War II and the actions of Adolf Hitler and the German nation and their hatred against the Jewish people of Europe. That's the only thing comparable, and that is detestable, and we almost become sick to think about what those people experienced during that historical period. That's what was planned for God's people. Esther learns of that plot in chapter 4, and Mordecai makes it very clear to her that the time to act was now, and we're going to come back of that, of course, to see her courage in just a moment. She decides finally to act. In chapter 5, she plans a banquet for the king, and the king comes to that, and she says, well, I'll just say, why don't you come back again another day? We'll have another feast, and we'll talk about what I want to talk about. In the meantime, Haman is cast down by his own pride because the king wants to honor a man whom Haman thinks has certainly got to be me, but it turns out to be Mordecai. If you've read the book, you know all of these details, but it's so just very beautiful as the story is weaved by God. So Mordecai is honored by Haman. Haman is so upset, he's just in a terrible spot. His family says, just go ahead and prepare the gallows, take care of him, get him out of your life. Okay, I'm going to do that. Chapter 7, the next feast is held, and Esther tells the king of Haman's terrible plot. He begs for his life, but to no avail. Haman is hung on the very gallows that he had provided for Mordecai. In chapter 8, Mordecai is promoted. The Jews are able to get relief from their enemies, and the rest of the book kind of details that, along with a little historical detail that's significant about the Feast of Purim that Jews still celebrate today, considering or commemorating this deliverance that God gave them. But that's the overall part of the book. 10 chapters. You could read it tonight. 20 minutes probably, maybe even less. May take you a little longer, but I promise if you want 30 good minutes, don't watch a TV show, read the book. And it'll have a little bit of everything in there. It's got romance for the ladies. It's got adventure and suspense for the men. Wonderful book. And you may say, well, God's not mentioned anywhere. He is not. But his influence is stamped very clearly in each and every chapter. Let's go back now to chapter 4. This plot had been planned, and the plot to destroy the Jews. Mordecai informs Esther of the plot. Now, what's remarkable when you think about courage in this book, maybe I should just say in passing, but it's very significant. Vashti was a courageous lady at the beginning of this book. Maybe we'll come back and think a little bit more about her in terms of application at the end. Mordecai is very courageous. In chapter 4, verse 1, he tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth and ashes, the traditional Jewish way of expressing sorrow. He went out in the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. Verse 2 is a detail that sometimes is overlooked, but I think it's significant. He went as far as the king's gate. No one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. He said, I'm going to make my protest. I don't care what happens to me, the consequences, I'm willing to ignore. He goes right up. If you've been to Washington, D.C., you know the big wrought iron gate there in front of the White House. It seems like everybody wants to jump over it now, and run on in there. That's kind of what's happening with the palace. I don't know if the Secret Service for Ahasuerus was any better than our guys are now, but he said, I'm going to go right up there and I'll get the king's attention one way or another. Maybe he was a little rash in doing that. Esther hears about what he's doing, so she quickly sends clothing to Mordecai in verse 4. He did not accept them, but she said, you better get out. This is not where you need to be in the way that you're acting. It's not going to do anything. Mordecai receives that information from her, and he said, are you aware of this edict in verse 8? Are you going to go into the king and implore his favor, plead with him for our people? Esther, do you think you will escape? Do you think that you can ignore our plight? You can hear the emotion in verse number 13. Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. And I didn't add the detail as we went through the summary, but Esther never revealed her national heritage. She never revealed that she was a Jew. Was she being dishonest? I don't think so. Maybe she just didn't think it was a significant matter, at least at the time. But now he says, you are a Jew. You are. These are your people. We are God's people. Do you think you will escape any more than all the Jews? Verse 14, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. So you've got a choice to make here. You've got a decision to make. I mentioned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I love their reply in Daniel chapter 3. To Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar just goes over, and he kind of turns the knob up on the stove. Now, he has to do some things other than just turn the knob on the stove, but you remember he kind of turns it up, and he says, boys, you see that fire over there? You think you're going to get out of that? Well, you remember what they said, and they said, oh, king, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. What the Hebrew really suggests, as I understand, they said, we're not worried about that. You think that scares us? God we serve is able to deliver us, and even if he chooses not to, we're not going to serve you, because we know what's right. We know we have principles, we have guiding truths that we're not going to bend, that we're not going to treat like elastic. We know what God said to do, and we're going to do it no matter what. And so Mordecai tells Esther, you need to do the right thing. If you choose not to, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. You and your father's house will perish. We're going to be saved. God's going to take care of us. Of that, there's no doubt. Whether you'll play your part or not, that's up to you. Now, the last question asked in verse 14. I know you've probably heard lessons about this, and if you've never studied it in detail, I'd invite you to do that. It's a wonderful study on this subject that we sometimes call providence. But Mordecai asked Esther this question. Who knows? Who knows whether you have come to the throne, or some versions say, have not attained royalty. In other words, who knows you're in this position for such a time as this. That's the key phrase, for such a time as this. Why are you here right now in this place? Why are you here, Esther? That's the question he wants her to answer. Now, I think it's very wise of him to say, who knows? I think one version says, perhaps you are the queen at this time for this reason. Now, going back to our sports analogy, our guys, no matter what sport it is, whether it's your team or not, and they ask them about something, they'll say something like, well, it is what it is. Don't you love that statement? It is what it is. Okay, I missed the ball, or I missed the shot, or I should have caught this, or I should have done that. And in order to escape responsibility, or maybe to admit error, I'll just say, well, it is what it is. Or God has a plan. And those are thrown out just as tried expressions, and sometimes they have no meaning or bearing on the situation whatsoever at all. And when we use expressions like, well, everything happens for a reason, there's an element of truth in that. Probably beyond our ability to really fathom. Romans 8:28, for the child of God is something that if you write in the margin of your Bible, you might put out the side of it. We know that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord, to those who are called according to his purpose. So Esther, you're the queen. Why are you the queen? How did all of this fall into place? Was it coincidence? Happy accidents? If you've studied biology at the university level under an atheistic professor, and you just point out some of the unique designs in the universe and in biology, They will point you to the experts and intellectuals in the field who have said, well, life just kind of happened through a series of happy accidents or coincidences, as if that's a suitable explanation. And that's the most absurd, illogical, irrational, scientific. It's not even proper to call it a scientific explanation. But you people that believe in faith that God created everything, well, you're the crazy ones. Who knows? You're here for this time. You're here in this place. You're here for this purpose. Perhaps, Esther, don't you see how God is providentially working everything out? That's what he is asking her to consider. Now, how did she show courage? That's the setting. That's the stage, if you will. Now the opportunity is before her. What does she do? Tonight I have three things very simply and very quickly that I'll present to you and ask you to consider how Esther demonstrated courage. Esther told them, this is verse 15, to reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa or Shushan. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. The law was, if you went into the king's presence, if he did not extend his golden scepter, that big stick that had some kind of precious metal, probably gold on it, maybe some jewels at the end. If he didn't extend that to you to say, come on in, you were missing your head very quickly thereafter. So she said, this isn't the way it's normally done. This isn't following proper protocol, but I realize the seriousness of the situation. I have to act on behalf of my people. Maybe God does have me here for this reason. So if I perish, I perish. But notice, number one, she showed courage because she considered the situation carefully. It takes courage to consider a situation carefully rather than just go in guns blazing, so to speak. That's kind of the way that too often I approach things, and I'm admitting readily to you tonight, maybe my downfall. If I see a problem, sometimes I want to jump in, and while I'm, falling into the problem, then I'm trying to work out how I need to handle it. It'd probably be better to take a step back, do some of those breathing exercises and go, okay, let's see what to do in this situation. Let me analyze it a little more. Esther, by not acting rash, I think showed courage. By not overreacting, perhaps, showed courage. In Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, there is the danger, perhaps, of overanalyzing and not realizing what we need to do in response to that. You remember these are the guys that after viewing the land of Canaan said, we can't go in there. Don't you realize we're like grasshoppers in their sight? 10 spies whose names we do not even remember, not even on Bible trivia night, can be recalled. Those 10 said we can't do it. Joshua and Caleb said, let's consider it. Yes, there is a situation in which their cities are well fortified, and yes, they're very powerful and mighty, but we have someone with us who can make the difference, and that's what we're going to see in Esther's case as well in just a moment. In 2 Kings chapter 6, I love how Elisha is here along with his servant, whether that be Gehazi or someone else. In 2 Kings chapter 6 and verse 15, the Bible says, when the servant of the man of God had risen early and gone out, behold, the army with horses and chariots was circling the city, and his servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? So he answered, Elisha, the prophet of God, said, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. That's some of that new math, right? He's looking around, he looks outside, and he sees, the whole city encompassed with the king of Aram and his armies and his chariots. And, he just said, it's hopeless. We're completely surrounded. And Elisha said, don't worry about it. There's more with us than with those guys. He's like, me and you, two of us, thousands of them perhaps. Well, you know what happened. Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw. Behold, the mountains were full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. See, analyze the situation. Realize in analyzing the situation and not acting rashly, courage says that if I consider the situation carefully, and if I'm a child of God, going back to the book of Esther now, number 2, I can show courage by putting the situation in God's hands. I can put the matter in His realm and trust Him to take care of it. That's exactly what she meant when she said, if I perish, I perish. She had resigned herself to that fact. If I perish, I perish. I know what is at stake. I know what it may cost me. But if it does, so be it. Because this is what the right thing to do will be. But I'm going to put the matter in God's hands. In 2 Chronicles chapter 32, again, one of those magnificent stories from the Old Testament. The Old Testament is filled with these, and we ought to study them probably more than a lot of us do, a lot more than I do. Sennacherib, he's the king of Assyria. He's already laid waste to the northern kingdom. And now he has marched, invaded Judah, and is surrounding Jerusalem. And if you read the entire context of these chapters, he just makes fun of the people. He says, you trust in a God? Well, those guys up north trusted in a God. You see what that got them. You better come on out. You better just surrender, because if you don't, I'm going to wipe you out. Hezekiah receives word. 2 Chronicles, chapter 32, verse 7 and 8. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be dismayed because of the king of Assyria, nor because of all the multitude which is with him. For the one with us, listen to Hezekiah, you want to hear a good leader? The one with us is greater than the one with him. With him is only an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. And the people relied on the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. I like that. I mean, that's one of those locker room speeches that would pump me up. Hezekiah said, don't worry about that guy, but don't you know what he's done? Don't you know all of our kinsmen to the north that he's already destroyed? Their villages and their peoples and their cities are laid waste. He said, don't worry about it. God's with us. Now, it's easy to say that. It's easy maybe even for a leader to say that. Sometimes it's very hard to internalize it. Joshua chapter 1, verses 5 to 9. Joshua was told by the Lord himself, my servant Moses is dead, but now you're in charge. Now you lead the people. Now you take them across into the promised land, because I will be with you. You remember twice in that same chapter, within the space of just a few verses, have I not commanded thee, be strong and of good courage, for I am with you. That's what the Lord said. So Esther shows courage. She considers, she analyzes the situation carefully. She doesn't act rashly. She doesn't act foolishly. She wants to follow God's way. Knowing that, then, number two, she puts the matter in God's hand, puts her trust in Him. She's going to do things differently than the way that the world does them. Just think about that, all the times that we try to react, and maybe we do things in a way other than the way that God would have us to do them. We need to trust His process, and Esther does. I'm going to trust God to work it out. And then number three, Esther was courageous tonight because when the time came to act, she acted. When the time came to act, she was ready to act. If I perish, I perish. And then the chapters that follow, she does take her time. She does, it seems, kind of slow walk the situation. But finally, when time came to act, she acted. Most of you appreciate that great theologian John Wayne. You remember what John Wayne said about courage? John Wayne said about courage, courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyways. I like that. I like it even more that tonight hadn't quite discovered America yet. A lot of us in the audience hadn't discovered America yet. But some of you remember what happened 73 years ago today, don't you? And what is so etched, and I put it on my Facebook at different times, and I want one day maybe to have a big picture blown up of it. But we don't even know who gets credit. The Getty Image Company claims the rights to it now, and I think you have to use it by their permission or purchase it. But you see U-boats approaching Normandy Beach. And those ramps come down. And there is a scene laid out there on the beaches of Normandy. And you see smoke billowing. And I can only imagine what those young men in those U-boats were thinking as they boarded those, and then as they got closer to shore. The D-Day invasion, 73 years ago today, is when that occurred. And that U-boat ramp dropped. And the bullets were whizzing. And the explosions were all around them. The smoke, the screaming. You know, I've never been in that setting. Some of you men maybe have been in combat. You would know in a way that only experience can teach what that must have been like for those men. But that picture just, to me, it just captures it so very poignantly, doesn't it? The ramp's down. Now, what do? You can't run back. You have to go forward. And while most of us in life will never have a situation that will parallel that as far as the threat and the danger that those young men face, I don't remember the exact number, but I know it's somewhere in the neighborhood, isn't it? 9,000 Americans lost their lives over that relative 72-hour period of the D-Day invasion. Normandy and the other beaches, Omaha, there as we launched our efforts to draw Hitler out, or to drive Hitler out of France and then out of Europe. But you see, that's what courage is. There's a time to act. You have to act. It's easy to talk about courage in this setting, but there's a time to act. David went and saw his brothers hiding from Goliath. He said, how long are you going to let that guy talk to you like that? How long are you going to let him make fun of God? You let me go have a piece of him. They thought, you're just a boy. Get out of here. David said, I'll show you. Saul said, well, at least take my armor. No, I don't need that. It don't work. God's on my side. I've got my slingshot. I've taken care of bear and lion. I'll take care of this uncircumcised Philistine. And he did. Daniel prayed in that lion's den that we mentioned earlier. It's amazing to read in the closing chapters of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You remember what happens when Jesus is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane? You remember? This is something that, again, just one of those details that's between the lines that maybe we don't give enough attention to. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is not hiding over in the shadows. He's not piled up a big bunch of rocks and brush, and he's not trying to camouflage himself like he might if you were going into the woods to hunt an animal. He's not hiding out saying, maybe they won't see me. You remember what happens? The Bible says the mob comes into the garden, and what happens? Jesus strides right up to meet them. They said, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. He said, I'm your man. You remember what happens to them? They all fall back. These guys are hard-headed. I mean, I would have just kind of called it a day then. Certainly I would have called it a day a little bit later when he puts old Malchus's ear back on and a lot of other things. But he says, you come what you come to do. Courage. I've prayed to my Father. I've asked him that if there's another way, I'd like to explore it. But he said this is the way it must be, so this is what we're going to do. Courage to act when the time to act. And so Jesus went to the cross. You know, it takes courage to live for the Lord. And again, we sometimes think of those extreme incidents, and we've heard more and more about them. They've not come with as much regularity to our shores yet, but I know, I can see the security cameras as I walk in. We're concerned about security. And I would like to think, and most of us men here with the bravado, we'd like to think if some guy jumped in the back and started shouting Arabic phrases and pulled out a machine gun, that we'd jump in front of the women here and we'd run to protect the children, and we'd say, you'll have to get through us before you get to them. We'll show courage in that way. Now, when the time actually came, and if we were put in the circumstance that I've described, would we? I don't know. I'd like to think, again, that I would have the courage necessary to do that. But you see, those are the great things, or the big, examples of which we sometimes cite to say, well, I'd be courageous then. But what about day by day? Probably the little things that we have to do every day to show courage are much more difficult. It takes courage. It takes courage to teach and train, to guide, to discipline your children, to show them that spiritual priority should be the priority. It takes courage to do that. It takes courage to help those children understand that, yes, your friends, they're going to do things other than what we do as a family. They're going to make other matters. They're going to put ball games or other things in front of the Lord. But we're going to be different. We're going to be courageous. It takes courage to tell your boss that. Now, I understand that there are duties that we all have, and sometimes those cannot be avoided. But if an ultimatum comes and he says, well, you've got to choose between me and that church you go to and me and that Jesus you claim to serve, you have to say, it's me and the Lord. You walk out not knowing where your next paycheck comes from, but knowing that the Lord is going to take care of you. That's the kind of courage I'm talking about. It takes courage. Some of you live with an unbelieving spouse. And I applaud you for that. And if you're one of those spouses that aren't living as the Lord would have you to live, and you have a loving husband or wife that's trying to show you by their life and example the right way to go, that's It's a great testament to their love for you, and I hope you'll consider it very carefully. But for those that live in that environment, that takes courage. It takes courage for us to understand the roles that we have within our families. It takes courage for our wives to understand that their role is to take care of their home, to submit to their husbands, to teach their children, all of those things. The world says, boy, that's enslaving. That's old-fashioned. That's outdated. That's bigoted. That's, you can throw out all of the favorite words that they like to use, but we still say we're going to do it God's way. This is God's way, and this way is right. That takes courage. It takes courage, as I said, for our young people to meet the temptations that they face. And, where does it end? I don't know. I remember hearing when I was younger, during those years, you guys have it so much harder than we do, or did. And that was spoken by parents and grandparents to me during my teenage years. And a lot of us remember that. And now that our children are entering that phase of life, we look at all of the temptations that they face. You're scared to death to let them walk outside the door sometimes, in the sense of what they will be tempted with. But if we have properly trained them, to teach them, it takes courage to meet whether it's some form of terrorism, whether it's educational terrorism, whether it's government terrorism. And what I mean by that is all of the forces that oppose Christianity. Folks, Jesus has never been popular. And we've lived in a country where up until the last 25 or 30 years, he was tolerated a lot more than he has been since that time. But we live in a time now when there is open antagonism to anything relating to Christianity. I know that you know that. And I know that we are still insulated. And we still like to say, well, the Upper Cumberland, it's not here yet. It's not. Not as much as it is in other places, but it's coming. And I think it's one of our duties, or one of our lessons that we put together for camp this year is going to be on Esther. And we're framing it around that idea for our young people to realize that you will have to risk in order to serve the Lord. You will have to risk friendships and may even lose them. You will have to risk financial gain and maybe lose it. You will have to risk position and acceptance among the world at large. But it's worth it. Will we be courageous? We must be, for God is with us. Courage. How did Esther demonstrate it? You can probably think of ways in addition to these. But tonight I have these three for you. She considered the situation carefully. Now again, sometimes we think to be courageous is to be like old Peter in the garden. He was the first one to pull his sword and just start whacking indiscriminately. I don't think he was just trying to do an eardectomy, or I don't know, whatever you call the medical procedure to remove an ear. Do you? I don't think he was just trying to get old Malchus's attention, just say, I'm going to take your ear off, and if you don't behave, I'll take the rest of you off. I think he was trying to split him right down the middle. Maybe old Malchus just got out of the way at the last moment. Jesus said, put up your sword. You need to consider, this is the hour of evil. This is the hour of darkness. And that's beyond the scope of this lesson to consider all of that. But consider the situation carefully. If we do that, then courage necessitates that if I'm going to deal with it, I have to put the matter in God's hands. Now, if you think that you have sufficient courage to handle whatever life throws at you on your own, you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be sadly disappointed because you'll feel the pain of failure. And that's something that we've all probably experienced already in life. I can handle it on my own, Lord. I don't need you. The Lord says, well, just see how that works out. And it never works out very good. And then finally, after we put the matter in God's hands, the time to act that is there, it must be acted upon. That's a paradox, I realize. You may say, how can you put it in God's hands and still act? Well, there's responsibilities on both parties. God is always going to do His part, to guide us, to protect us, to be with us. That may not always turn out exactly like we might think it should, but we know that He, being with us, He tells us to do what He has told us to do, assured that He will always keep up, if you will, His end of the deal. Esther and courage, what a great study. And I pray tonight that you've been benefited by our time together in studying it. Tonight, do you have the courage to serve the Lord? As I said, it's not easy. It's a lot easier to serve Satan. It's a lot easier to live for the devil. I mean, some people may say, well, the preacher shouldn't say that. Well, it's true. And Jesus said it so much so that in Luke chapter 9, verse 23, He said, if any man will come to me, let him deny himself, take up the cross daily and follow me. That sounds like it takes a lot of courage to me. But John promises us in 1 John, you remember, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. We win. That's the good thing about being courageous on the Lord's side. There's no doubt. The outcome is not uncertain. It's not up in the air. It's not yet to be, decided. The Lord's made it clear in His Word who will win. He wins. Jesus wins. If we follow Him, then we will too. Tonight, if you're not a child of God, we beg of you to show the courage necessary. Confess Jesus as your Lord, to be baptized, have your sins forgiven. We gladly assist you in doing that. Maybe as a child of God tonight, not having the courage that you should have shown in other instances. Maybe in times of weakness, didn't show the courage that you know you should. Or maybe it's just not been the case that you've had the courage necessary to address the sin that you know that's in your life that shouldn't be there. Tonight, have the courage to seek the Lord's forgiveness. Know that He'll grant it, and that we'll help you in every way that we can. Tonight, if you're subject to that gospel message, why don't you come as we stand and sing together?